This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
And welcome in, folks, to another edition of Open Mic Night. I am your host, Noah Taluki, and on today's episode, we're going to break down this Week 3 Lions loss to the Vikings, 28-24, blowing a 10-point fourth quarter lead, giving up 14 unanswered to the Vikings. I want to break this down, and I know there's a lot of talk out there about, fire Dan Campbell and all this craziness, and he's a bad coach, and I don't know if the Lions can win. I'm gonna try my best to try to silence those critics as much as possible because I don't believe in any of that one bit. But of course, last week we didn't have an episode either, so we're gonna talk a little bit about that win over Washington in Week 2 as well, and also big news from the Tigers front office. Tigers hire Scott Harris as its president of baseball operations, replacing Al Avila, who was both the president of baseball operations and the general manager. We're assuming that they will hire another general manager, to complement with Scott Harris. But this is a very key start for the Tigers, and I want to talk about why I'm really excited about this hire in Scott Harris, and a little bit more about him as well. But hopefully everybody had a great last 2 weeks out there. Of course, just busyness at John Carroll. It just never stops in sports information. And, we had all kinds of homecoming festivities last week. Football team is off to a 2-1 start, by the way. Also, with a lot of John Carroll Athletic Hall of Fame stuff we had to do, with the program and the dinner and whatnot. So just a very busy last week, and but really looking forward to being back with you guys. Of course, this over 100 episodes now here on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. Been going for over 2 years strong now, and really happy we're back with you after a little hiatus after last week as well. All right, some Lions to discuss as always, losing 28-24 to the Vikings. And, this is what I have to say first. We go back a little bit to Week 2 last week, right, when they play Washington. And, Washington came in, not the strongest team in the NFL, I would say, but the Lions never trailed in that game. They looked very strong from start to finish. Aiden Hutchinson had 3 sacks in the first half, the first rookie to ever have 3 sacks in a game for the Lions. In general, just a game, not even just a half, a game. Defense looked very strong. The offensive line was manhandling Washington. DeAndre Swift ran wild. Amon-Ra St. Brown was catching balls over the place. Jared Goff looked very efficient with 4 touchdown passes. I mean, we don't see that too often from him. And nationally, and locally and nationally, people were praising the Lions, saying this team has a legit offense. They can contend with the best in the NFC, really, and the best of football. They have not had they have not scored 35 plus points in 3 consecutive games since 1952. 1952. You know what happened that year? The Lions won the NFL championship. That's like my Doak Walker and Bobby Lane talk and Buddy Parker talk that I've talked to you guys about before from that era. Obviously, very different now. But I think it's a sign. It's a sign that this offense and Ben Johnson with his creativity and getting Amon-Ra St. Brown in space, getting DeAndre Swift working him and with the offensive line, I think that's really a big plus. And it's something that can take this team far. Now, Week 3 comes, right? They have to go on the road to Minnesota. I don't care how bad or good a divisional opponent is. Anytime it's a divisional game and you're on the road, it's tough. It's tough. The Vikings could have been winless, and this still would have been a very tough game for the Lions. And they go in, and honestly, they play pretty well in the first half. They went right down the field and scored on their opening possession. I believe T.J. Hawkinson was the one that had the touchdown. And this team really looked like that they were, it was Jamal Williams. TJ had the touchdown in the second half. But team looked like they were really rolling. Defensively, they were playing well. And then all of a sudden, they kind of let a little bit go and really lost it in the fourth quarter. I mean, 14 unanswered by the Vikings. And of course, the one thing that everyone's talking about in Detroit is Dan Campbell opting to go for it on a 4th and short, 4th and inches, kick the field goal instead of go for it on the 4th and inches. And, well, here's my thoughts on all this. We know how aggressive Dan Campbell is as a coach. He's gone for it on 4th down multiple times. We know. But I just don't understand what the whole fuss is about. Okay, if you get the points, great. 2-possession game. If you don't get the 4th down, they're still right there. So it was probably just one of those instances where Dan Campbell was just trying to be safe. He didn't want to be aggressive. He knows that he's a very aggressive guy, but he wanted to be safe. Okay, they've been stacking this line all the second half. They know what we're going to do. Let's just try for points. And if we don't get it, then Minnesota takes over from there. You guys criticize Dan Campbell for being too aggressive sometimes. Now you criticize him for not being aggressive on one play. Obviously, Minnesota scored. But I don't see what the whole fuss is about. Now, I get Austin Seibert is not a very good kicker. And why the Lions have kicking problems probably goes back to training camp. There was a battle between Seibert and Riley Patterson for the job. Seibert just plain out beat Riley Patterson, and I was a little surprised because Patterson made every single kick for the Lions. I know he was just on the team for the second half of the year, but he went something like 13 for 13 or 15 of 15 or something like that. I believe he made every single kick last year. So it was a little bit surprising when I saw that Austin Seibert, a guy that Riley Patterson had kind of beaten out last year, all of a sudden beats Patterson this year. And now he's the guy. His career long was 53. And he was trying a 58-yarder. I'm telling you, life without Prater, man, it's crazy. You know, everyone. You know, I know some of you guys out there thought Prater was old and whatnot, but you know, a 58-yard kick is still a hard kick, even if it's indoors. It's still a hard kick to make, and I'm more concerned with like maybe kicking problems rather than this whole decision to not go for it. How about we focus on, you know, trying to get our kicker right first before we start thinking about, you know, all this Dan Campbell not going for it on 4th down, 4th and inches and whatnot. And now everyone out there saying, well, Lions can't win with Dan Campbell. Can't win with Dan Campbell. Guys, last week you were saying that the Lions can win with Dan Campbell. All of a sudden in a week, after one game that the Lions blow a lead, you guys are already saying, you know, this Dan Campbell can't do it. You guys have to stop. Please stop. Dan Campbell is the right coach for this team right now. He is. He's a guy that everyone plays for, everyone believes in. And I know he took the blame after in the post-game press conference. He said, you know, it was my fault. I, you know, should not have gone for it. At least he's taking the blame. At least, but, you know, he has to say that, I feel like. He has to put the blame on himself. I mean, it was ultimately his decision. If they convert it, I mean, it ices the game for sure. But if they don't, Minnesota has a chance. I think he just wanted to see if they could maybe just, if Seibert could just get a little bit more on his leg and make that kick, even though his career long was only 53. But if he makes that kick, man, Lions go up 2 possessions. They put it in their back pocket. They win. But yeah, you know, and we saw Dan Campbell grow as a coach a lot last season. You know, we saw him make mistakes early on in the season. Then towards the end of the year, you know, he was calling really, really good games. You know, he was managing timeouts correctly and all that. I know Mike Valeni out there was saying, is Dan Campbell just another Jim Caldwell? No. Jim Caldwell, there was a rift there, especially with timeouts and whatnot. I don't think that's what Dan Campbell's a very different coach than Jim Caldwell. Dan Campbell brings energy. I don't think Jim Caldwell definitely brought professionalism, and the players respected him, but it was a very different tone with Caldwell rather than Campbell. Campbell's a lot more emotion. Obviously was an ex-player, so he understands the player perspective probably better than Caldwell. So enough with is Dan Campbell just another Jim Caldwell, please. Some other bad news. Gosh, Amon-Ra St. Brown a little banged up. DeAndre Swift, now it looks like he might miss some time with a shoulder injury. Gosh, I mean, he didn't really look like him. I mean, 7 carries for 31 yards. Jamal Williams had to do the bulk. He had 20 for 87 and the 2 touchdowns at the goal line. But man, if Swift is out, this is a big loss because now don't get me wrong, Jamal Williams is probably one of the best number 2 running backs in the NFL. But however, is this a guy that you can just ride and have him carry your offense like Swift would? I don't know. So with Swift out, I'm kind of assuming that Jared Goff, they're going to go to the air. They're going to try to get Amon-Ra St. Brown open and Josh Reynolds and Chark. They're going to use these guys a lot more. TJ Hawkinson. So expect the Lions to be throwing this football more as we get to Seattle next week. I think. And by the way, so Seattle, they're back at home. The home crowd energy and whatnot. Seattle's not a good team either. I know they beat Denver and whatnot, but they're not a good team. So if the Lions come out on top and they win the Seattle game, it's over. I don't think there's any reason to panic. Now, if they go out and lay an egg against Seattle, then maybe I'll get a little bit more worried. But if they go out and beat Seattle and look good offensively, and I understand that Swift's out, so maybe it's a little closer than some people realize, but they have to beat Seattle. The good teams in this league, they find ways through injury. They find ways to win through injury. That's what the Lions did last week against Washington. Dan Skipper, the practice squad guy, he's been with the team since Patricia. I think he may have even been signed by Jim Caldwell for a little bit on the practice squad. This guy's never started an NFL game before. I think this is his 6th season. He comes in and is like one of the best offensive linemen on the team that day. This is what I mean by guys stepping up when injury happens. How deep the offensive line is. Can Jamal Williams really be that workhorse that DeAndre Swift? Different runners, but can Jamal Williams really pick up the slack that Swift, would have had if he was in? Obviously, he's going to be out for a couple weeks. Craig Netflix Reynolds will probably be getting more carries as well. He had that one good game last year. I can't remember who it was against, but man, he who knows? He could go off too. But they got to start. They're probably going to have to target Amon-Ra even more. TJ Hawkinson probably going to have to get him in the mix as well. So it's going to be interesting to see what this attack is against Seattle in next week. By the way, Scotty Nelson, our friend of the podcast, my former classmate at U of D, I believe he's still on Seattle's practice squad. Of course, they're coming a little homecoming to Detroit for Scotty. I don't think he'll be on the active roster for this game. But, things could change as we're recording here on a Wednesday. But, it'd be nice to see. I'd love to see Scotty out there playing, but I don't think it's going to happen. But, like I said, I think this is no reason to panic. It's one game, guys. It's one game. And I know we've been waiting for a long, long time and whatnot, and, we've seen this before. No, guys. Dan Campbell will learn from his mistakes. And I honestly don't have a problem with going for the field goal. I don't. It shows that Dan Campbell at least has faith in his kicker, even though he was 1 for 3. But he's got faith in someone. Oh, man. Like I said, if they start 1-3, I'm a little worried. But if they go out there and beat Seattle, get to 2-2, I'm fine. Then we'll have a chance for Dallas or New England first, then Dallas. Hopefully 4-2 by the bye. Why not? 4-2 by the bye. That'd be solid. By the way, man, I feel like this year there's just been some surprises in the NFL. Like, did anyone expect Miami to be 3-0 at this point? Man, like even with that, butt kick or whatever you call it, like the punt that went off the upbacks behind and out of the end zone. even with that weird play, they still won. And then Buffalo couldn't snap the ball in time. They couldn't get up to the line. And Ken Dorsey, their offensive coordinator, is throwing stuff like a child, throwing his toys up in the booth because he's so upset that happened. Who expected Miami and Mike McDaniel to be 3-0? I got to admit, Mike McDaniel, I never thought he would succeed as a coach. Never. I just thought he was too cool guy, too geeky a little bit. But hey, don't judge a book by its cover. Those guys obviously love playing for him. And there must be some sort of method behind his madness. I mean, they're 3-0 right now with Tua as their quarterback. With Tua. I mean, let's see if this keeps it up, but I know it's they beat Buffalo. And it's in Miami. I get Miami's a very tough place to play, especially for divisional opponents. But I'm surprised at that start. Just one of the many. And of course Trey Lance getting hurt. Now Jimmy Garoppolo's back for the 49ers. It doesn't seem like it's working out much in Denver right now for Russell Wilson and company, even though they just beat the 49ers, but it didn't really look good offensively. Man, just some couple of surprises this year in the NFL. That's for sure. All right, we're going to move on to Tigers just before we close out here on a Wednesday. I know it's a couple weeks ago it was announced, but this is the first episode we've had in 2 weeks. The Tigers hiring Scott Harris as the president of baseball operations. I didn't really know much about Scott Harris. I'm not going to sit on the air here and pretend like I know everything about this guy. But the basic info, he's only 36 years old. Of course, Avila was fired back on August 10th. Man, how about this record with Avila? 404 wins, 573 losses. Yikes. Tigers have not had a winning season since 2016. Now have not reached the playoffs since 2014. This is a guy so Scott Harris, 36 years old, like I said, he came over from the San Francisco Giants. So, and they're obviously one of the better organizations in baseball. This guy was also Theo Epstein's right-hand man in Chicago when they won the World Series in 2016. So basically, there's a lot of Tiger fans out there that wanted Theo Epstein. And it was more so of like, in your wildest dreams are we getting Theo Epstein. But this Scott Harris seems to be like the best thing the Tigers could have gotten besides Theo Epstein. Like I mentioned, he was his right-hand man when they won when they won the World Series in 2016. Then he goes over to San Francisco and, helps them continue to be a contender. I just wonder, why did he leave San Francisco? I think personally it was because Chris Ilitch and company with the Tigers just said, this is a big mess to clean up. We are going to give you full reign. Here are the keys to the kingdom. We're going to let you be. And I think he said it in his press conference. He said, I'm really open to this challenge. I really think of this as a new challenge for me. And gosh, it's going to be a challenge. I mean, there's a lot to clean up with this team. But I think what Scott Harris brings is, first of all, baseball is traditionally, a lot of people say it's an old man's game, right? It's dominated by older people, and that's the audience that watches it, and that's the way they think, blah, blah, blah. But Scott Harris brings a little bit more of a young sense of blood into the organization. This is a guy that is very analytically driven as well. Now, I know there's always been a debate in baseball between analytics and the human essence of it and all that stuff. Personally, I'm not as big into analytics as some of these other people. I'm not saying analytics doesn't help. I just think that the human side should always reign king, and then analytics can just add to that and help. But, baseball seems to be, it's going more towards the analytical side. This is a guy that understands analytics, and I think that's something that the Tigers, it was lacking. They were really behind in the analytics game. And Scott Harris brings new blood to the table and has a plan, at least, to implement this more. I don't think that is a bad thing. I think it's just something that helps. I'm curious to see how well he wants to how well he works with AJ Hinch. And I know I've talked about it before how, AJ might be tempted to leave Detroit after this season, but since the Tigers hired Scott Harris, maybe he'll want to stay because this is a guy that maybe shares the same vision as AJ that Al didn't think. He didn't have the same vision. I mean, this is a quote from AJ. He says, he's all in. He wants to win the World Series. He's competitive. He wants to win. He made it clear to me that it's a priority to him, and that's what you want to hear in your situation. Okay, great. Great start. I think another thing that Scott Harris needs to do is definitely clean up the minor league system. Because, who do they have? Torkelson and Green. Torkelson came back up, by the way, from Toledo. I think he's going to end the season with the Tigers. But, okay, you have two talented young hitters, and really they've struggled. But who do you have coming up? What, Dylan Dingler? Roberto Campos, who's 18 years old, still a long ways away. Jackson Jobe, who's 18 as well. Pitcher from last season. I just think there needs to be some sort of sense of direction with the minor league system. Because for decades, this team has not had a very strong minor league system. Heck, look at Cleveland. They just won the AL Central. They're the youngest team in baseball. A lot of those guys came up in the farm system. Or they made trades, like I know with the big Clevenger trade with the Padres, they got a lot of those key guys. This is the youngest team in baseball. And just a bunch of scrappy guys, young, aggressive, energetic, all fed through the farm system. And I've mentioned it before. I've been in the farm system with Cleveland. I was with Akron, the Rubber Ducks, AA, in 2019. I was with Lake County, the Captains, Single A, in 2021. When I was with Akron, interning there, I can't remember the names, but gosh, there were a decent amount of guys on that team who are now with the big league club. Playoff contenders. AL Central bound. Lake County. There are guys on that team this season and last year that will be with the big league club in the next year or so. They just keep funneling talent. And that's something that the Tigers, I think, can learn from, is this whole system. And Scott Harris comes from organizations with good farm systems like the Giants, the Cubs, and company. They've had good farm systems in the past. So I think analytics-based and maybe to try to beef up the farm system more. I think those are two keys that Scott Harris has to bring to the table in order to fix this. The other thing, too, is I wonder, remember when the Tigers traded for Austin Meadows at the beginning of the season and they shipped out Isaac Paredes? Then all of a sudden, the Rays discovered a little thing with his swing. He altered it just a touch through analytics that was able to make him produce power, something that he was never able to do in Detroit. That might be something that AJ Hinch just never had control of with the analytics and whatnot. Maybe Scott Harris comes in, he embraces it. Maybe they start to find some things that, the Tigers have never seen in the past with some of these guys. Hey, Torkelson, maybe adjust your swing a little bit more on this. Maybe, we noticed that you're doing this. This is what you have to do to follow through more. I don't know what it is, but maybe this is what they have to talk, because the Tigers obviously have guys that were highly touted coming out of the draft, like Riley Green and Torkelson, and the young pitchers that have been overworked and have been hurt. Casey Mize, Tommy John, Matt Manning, Spencer Turnbull. When was the last time we saw him on the mound? I feel like it's been since his no-hitter against the Whites, or whoever it was. I think the White Sox, or Mariners, like 3 years ago. I think that was like the last time we saw him. So, or last season, I should say. But I think a sense of direction, especially in the minor league system, is what is going to pay dividends for this Tigers team moving forward. Plus, the Tigers aren't like Cleveland, who are basically on a budget. They don't spend a lot of money. The Tigers have spent money before. So Scott Harris, I think, can try to combine maybe spending money with a strong farm system. I think that's a good combo. Spending some money while also having the farm system, maybe saving some money if you develop these players, and get them up on the big league club. Develop something, a little kink maybe that they haven't discovered yet to help them, hit better, pitch better. Little things like that might be analytically driven that helps the human side. You don't want to all be data driven, because then, like I said, that doesn't include the human side and the human element to things. But I think embracing analytics helps, and I think that's what Scott Harris is going to bring to the table. He's from the Bay Area. He's from Redwood City. Graduated from 2009 from UCLA. He also studied at the Columbia Business School, and he received an MBA from Northwestern's Kellogg School in 2015. So this guy is very highly educated. It's obvious. And seemingly he knows baseball. I'm impressed. I'm very impressed. And I think AJ Hinch seems like he's a fan. I just wonder who Scott Harris is going to hire as GM. Is he going to just say, hey, AJ, you handle the GM. I'll be the president of baseball operations. Is Scott Harris going to be both the GM and president of baseball? I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. But, seemingly so, he's just the president of baseball operations for right now and has yet to hire a GM. So, 36 years old. I think this guy has a vision. And I think this was the best guy the Tigers could have hired, outside of maybe Theo Epstein. But we all knew that the Tigers were not getting Theo Epstein. So I'm hoping, and this is the other thing too, I'm hoping that Chris Ilitch just gives Scott Harris the keys. You and AJ, it's all your show. I'm going to back out. I'm not going to do anything. It is all your show. He seemed to do that with Al. Didn't work. But I trust this guy right off the gate more than I do with with Al Avila. Right away. I mean, heck, the Tigers are even winning some games now. I don't know if Scott Harris has anything to do with that. I don't know if he's, trying to tweak some of these guys, and all that at the end of the season. But heck, they swept the White Sox. I know it doesn't mean anything, but a couple wins here as soon as Scott Harris takes over. Maybe it's a good sign. But I just, especially with Miggy being on the books for next year, he's still up in the air if even he's going to play next year. I mean, I'm assuming Miggy will come back, because he'll have his whole round of, all the teams will be giving him gifts, and everyone will be sending him farewell. I think this was Pujols' year this year. I think next year's Miggy's year. Why not come back? Play out your contract. Scott Harris can get him off the books and really have a clean slate to start with, especially after Miggy's off the books. So the Tigers' future is bright, I think. I think just with hiring Scott Harris, they're already on the right track. Already. I'm not saying World Series next year. I'm not saying playoffs. I'm not even saying winning record next year, because there's a lot to clean up. However, I think this team is on the right track with him, and there was nobody better besides Theo Epstein, maybe, that they could have hired. Really, really exciting stuff to see from the folks at Comerica Park. Thank you again, folks, for tuning in to today's episode. Make sure to tune in to all the other great podcasts on the podcast network. The Michigan Podcast, the Wrestling Podcast, the Fan Report, Pistons coming up. Should be a really fun and exciting year for the folks at Little Caesars Arena. Even the Red Wings, as well as a couple of our podcasts talk about them as well. The Iser Plan, as I like to call it, as they just began training camp earlier last week. And make sure to check out John Macaron's fantastic coverage that he does with SI Lions. Thanks again, folks, for tuning in, and make sure to tune in next week, only on Open Mic Night.